especially on the hair. As for the blending mode for this, I find that screen, overlay, or add all work fine. Experiment to see what you like. In particular though, I really like the hard light layer style because it's a combination of multiply and screen in one layer. This is pretty convenient if you're like me and you get confused by having too many layers. But what if this isn't enough? What about soft shading? Real life isn't all just hard shadows like this. But before we can get into soft shading, I think it's important to understand the basics of how shadows work. Let's take a look at form shadows again and break it down further. Notice that this part of the shadow, closest to the light, actually tends to be the darkest. This is called the core shadow, or terminator. But why is it the darkest? Why is it lighter here? This is due to the reflected light. Remember, that light can bounce off surfaces to lighten the shadow a bit. In this case, it's kind of bouncing off this imaginary white table. But it's important to make sure that this reflected light isn't too bright, since it'll never be as bright as the direct light source, and that cast shadows can also be affected by that reflected light. There's also a different kind of shadow that I haven't talked about before, and I think this shadow is actually the most important shadow to remember if you want your shading to look lifelike and 3D. Occlusion shadows. This type of shadow has nothing to do with the direction of the light. Basically, it's a very dark shadow that occurs when two surfaces are close together or touching. And it happens because light can't get into these tiny little crevices. I find that including these shadows can make a big difference. You either add them onto a new layer, or sometimes I like to incorporate it into line art by blending and smudging the lines a little bit. But there's still one important key difference between this and this. And that's of course because of the edges. There are different types of edges. Hard edges, which imply a sharper corner, and soft edges, which represent softer curves, and some weird in-between edges as well. If we want to start softening those edges, we can either use an airbrush to do it, or use blending tools to start softening those hard edges. But we do have to be careful here, because there is a trap. One that I personally completely fell into. When I first started doing soft shading, I really admired beautifully rendered pieces like this, or this. I really wanted to achieve this kind of almost soft, ethereal look, so I started softening and blending out all of my edges. But strangely enough, when I started blending out the edges in my illustrations, it didn't look like this. It looked blurry or even muddy. It felt flat instead of soft. Why is that? To find out, if we take a closer look at some of these gorgeous illustrations, we notice that not all of the edges are soft. It's important to remember that contrast and variety in edge types are important to make your illustration look appealing. Layering all these multiply and hard light and overlight layers works pretty well, but I realize it has a pretty major weakness. Let's say there's a specific color you want to use. With all these blending layers stacked on top, it can be pretty hard to predict what the final color is going to be. Besides, isn't that overcomplicating things? It would be easier if you can simply pick a color and apply it to your drawing, right? And you can absolutely do that. This is the even less secret technique number 2. Just do it. Just create a layer you want to add color to, don't touch the blending modes, select a color from your color picker, and just start painting. When you want to add shadows, grab a darker color and paint it on top. Simple, easy, is what I wish I could say, because I actually find this really, really hard. Let's go back to picking shadow colors. I said it should be darker, but like, how much darker? Should we move it to the left? To the right? Maybe we should change the color a little bit? What's the right color to pick? So this is where color theory comes into play. All colors have 3 important properties. Hue, represented by where on the color wheel it is. Saturation, or how vibrant or colorful the color is. Moving to the right makes the color more saturated. And finally, value, or brightness. This is how light or dark a color is. Moving upwards makes the color brighter. It's worth noting, though, that of course there are different color pickers depending on your drawing application of choice. Saturation or lightness might be arranged differently or in reverse, but hopefully you still get the idea. You can even use these sliders to pick your colors instead, which is what I personally prefer using. But as I was saying, color theory is complicated. This is all only scratching the surface. Lots of things affect the color of a shadow, such as ambient light, material, and to know all this requires a lot of study and practice that I haven't done yet. So honestly, I rarely use this technique simply because I don't understand color very well. The only time I do is when I have some kind of clear color reference. So for me, it's definitely easier to tackle all this hue, saturation, and value stuff one step at a time. And out of these three things, one is actually the most important for making striking illustrations, and that is value. Values are probably the most crucial thing when it comes to the overall readability of a composition. But how can we make sure our piece's values are good? One simple way of checking is to simply convert our illustration to black and white. Create a layer on top with the blending mode set to color or saturation. Then you simply fill the whole layer with black. Then zoom out to check that everything is still readable when the piece is small. Due to kind of complicated color theory reasons, this won't be a completely accurate representation of the true values, but it's probably close enough for our purposes. However, having to check the values over and over again can get pretty annoying. If values are so important, wouldn't it be easier to design a drawing around values from the ground up? And fortunately, there is a way to do this.
I used to run out of my liquid detergent so fast because it's mostly water. And that's why I switched to Tide Power Pods. They're pre-measured to meet the cleaning needs of today's big machines. Look how big they are. They are packed with 4 times more cleaning power and 2 times more odor fighters.
I'm having to go back and redo page 12 of the book. I'm finished inking, but like I said, I left this page alone because wasn't too for sure on how I'm gonna do it or wanted to do it, so I just went back and
United Healthcare gave me great dental, great vision, and convenience to choose.
It was easier for me to go back to redo.
The monthly premium was very much in my price range and very affordable. United Healthcare made that easy for me.
And like I said, I'm trying not to spend too much time on it because I need to just go ahead and get this page inked because it's the last page.
Etsy's top 100 gifts. Etsy's curated list for the most unique gifts for her, personalized gifts for him,
this is the last page I need to ink.
and even the perfect gifts for pets. Really up against
like
the
I
clock?
said,
You can't go wrong with an Etsy gift card. Isn't it nice when the holiday shopping is done for you? Shop
I don't
Etsy,
draw
and your
traditionally like,
procrastination
you
can
know,
be our
everybody
little
else, but,
secret.
you know, it is what it is.
Introducing the not-so-secret technique number 3,
And I've
grayscale
been
to
watching
color.
my videos while I've been
This
doing
method
this.
seems like magic sometimes. Instead of going straight in with flat colors, I start with shades of
So
gray.
basically,
Then I gradually blend and soften my edges as
this
needed.
is
When I'm satisfied with how my painting looks in black and white, then I can start adding color. Once
EQ
again, we can use the
before.
power of layers with
This when they
blending modes
first
here.
got signed.
By creating a
and
layer
on
on top with the
stage
color blending
at
mode,
the
we can
concert.
paint on top to colorize the image. Then a little bit of refining and done. Except if anyone has tried this method, then they know it's not so easy. One really
And
common
I'm-
issue
like I said,
that a lot of
I'm
people
me
seem to
personally.
encounter when adding colors is that
I'm not
it
a
looks really
crowd.
washed
I don't
out
draw
or
crowds,
muddy
but
even.
this is
Here's
more,
an
like I said,
example.
this first
Let's
time
say
really
you want to
just
color
doing
in this
crowd.
circle a vibrant yellow
Drawing
color.
crowd,
So you create a color layer on top,
Yeah.
take the most intense yellow color you can, and oh, that does not look very vibrant. How can you make the yellow look less dirty? The answer? You can't. At least, not without some changes to your grayscale painting. Something important to realize is that different hues have max saturation at different values or brightnesses.
That's just to show
You
some
can
other stuff
easily
though.
make the same circle of bright red or a different color to the light. Change the saturation and the hue a little bit. And don't forget that once the base colors are down, you can paint on top of everything else to refine things and really tie things together and get those details just right. And there you have it. The 3 not very secret techniques that I like to use to color and shade my drawings. Keep in mind that these are just the 3 I prefer using, and there are a lot of other ways of going about coloring. But I hope they served at least as a useful starting point. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye!
Welcome to the Future Hotline, where absolutely nobody has any idea what they're talking about. Future Hotline, what chaos do you want me to predict today?
Will it rain in Texas on Tuesday?
It says, ask again later. Hello, and welcome to our show. Is Boston winning this week? Card says, vibes unclear. Is inflation going down or what? Buddy,
that time again. It's time for Star to yell about making comics again. Whee! So I made a video recently called 10 Things You Should Never Do in a Webcomic, and after I finished that video, I wanted to make a follow-up with a more positive spin. So this is that. I racked my brain and came up with 10 more art tips for webcomic creators that I've learned from my own experience, and I'm going to impart the wisdom upon ye in hopes that it'll help you on your webcomic journey. I definitely recommend watching that first video as well. You don't have to watch them in order or anything, but if webcomics are something you're interested in, that one will also offer some helpful advice. I also have a bunch more art-related videos on my channel, so feel free to check those out as well. Also, if you enjoy my tips and advice, I want to point out that I have an entire book I wrote about making webcomics called How to Webcomic. We just wrapped up the Kickstarter campaign to fund the book printing a few weeks ago, and if you missed the Kickstarter, the books will be added to my online store not long after this video goes up. I'll have a link in the description once one's available, as well as in my pinned comment, so go check those out. So, let's get into it. Here's 10 things that every webcomic artist should do. Keeping with tradition, I gotta start with a controversial one. Things every webcomic creator should do, number 1, start small. I've seen a lot of the discourse around this topic on webcomics Twitter and other communities, so I know exactly how contentious of a topic it is. But here's my 2 cents on the matter. If your goal is to make a webcomic, there's a good chance that you probably already have some kind of story in mind. And if you're anything like I am, that story is probably very long, very involved, and will take you multiple years to fully draw in comic form. But if you've never made comics before, jumping straight into a huge multi-year webcomic project is like jumping into the deep part of the ocean before you've learned how to swim. It's so incredibly easy to get in over your head, get scared because you don't know what you're doing, and give up because you underestimated how difficult it is and how much work it takes. It's only natural to struggle the first time you're working in a new medium after all. So rather than jumping into your 1,000-page long epic fantasy magnum opus right away, I recommend cutting your teeth on some smaller, simpler comic projects you can easily finish to ease yourself into making comics and get used to the workflow before jumping into something larger. For example, when I was in middle school, I made a ton of dumb 4-panel comics about stuff my friends said and did. They were just silly doodles I did in my sketchbook, but those little comics were good practice in figuring out comedic timing and basic paneling. I eventually moved on to making a lot of fan art comic strips in high school and started doing them digitally, which taught me a lot about using digital art and how to color my comics. I then started my first proper long-form comic in college, and if I didn't have that previous experience under my belt, my first webcomic would have been a lot worse. Like using training wheels when you're first learning how to ride a bike, starting with a smaller, simpler comic project before jumping into a larger one is always a good idea in my opinion. Now, if you already have your big comic idea that you're completely smitten with and you can't bring yourself to work on anything else, my recommendation is to embrace that. And maybe start with a short side story set in your comics universe or something about your characters.
And like I said,
Maybe
these are just pages that I wanted to go back and redo that I didn't ink because I wasn't for sure if I was satisfied with that one or not.
This is also a great way to get people interested in your world and characters before starting a longer comic endeavor. A long story short, don't jump into the deep end right away. I recommend starting with something simple and work your way up. And speaking of keeping things simple, things every webcomic creator should do, number 2, keep your character designs simple and easy to draw. So here's the thing about making comics.
When they were still ESC before they became Physhguillz.
Over and over again. And the more detailed your character designs are, the more difficult
and like
it's going to
sometimes,
be
like I
to
said,
draw
a
them
lot of people
over and
tell
over
you
and over
not,
and over and over
just to
again
do
on
your
every single page.
sketches,
I
real
always hear
loose.
artists complain
This
when
is
drawing
loose as I
fan
can
art of,
get.
say, Genshin Impact characters that have crazy detailed outfits that take a ton of time to draw correctly. But consider, that's just drawing a character once. On a single comic page, you might have to draw that same character anywhere from 2 to 8 times in a single page. And when you're drawing that super ornate and detailed outfit for the 300th time and your arm feels like it's going to fall off, you might wish you had stuck with something less detailed. So my advice is
like
that when you're designing your comics characters, make them easy to draw. Or at the very least, design them so you won't go crazy drawing them over and over again. One design tip I have is that once you think you've settled on a character's design, try drawing them a few times without looking at your reference. If you constantly forget parts of your character's design, it might be a better idea to just toss that detail out. Fiddly little details will be hard to remember, and it'll slow you down if you have to constantly keep looking at your references. Don't drive yourself crazy.
Nope, I know my
Keep your
character by
characters easy to
heart.
draw. Moving right along to things every webcomic creator should do. Number 3, back up your files. Let me spin you a tale, dear viewers. Imagine you've been working on your comic for a few months, maybe even a few years. You have hundreds of hours of work, every single page you've ever made for your beloved story, saved on your one computer. But then, all of a sudden, a rock flies through your window and destroys your computer. Or your hard drive goes up in flames. Or your house floods and short circuits your PC. Or maybe one day your computer just, I don't know, gives up and refuses to boot up anymore. If you only have your comic files saved on a single computer and don't have your files backed up anywhere, you'll lose all your work. All those hundreds of hours of drawing and painting gone in a single instance of bad luck. I don't think I need to tell you that that is bad. This is why I always recommend backing up your comic pages in multiple locations. In addition to having my comic pages saved on my computer, I also have them all backed up on multiple external hard drives, as well as an online file saving service. The more places you can back up your files, the less likely it is that you'll lose all your work if disaster strikes. A college professor once told us the story of a student who had the files for his senior film backed up on his home computer, the school's network, and an external hard drive. In one day, the school network crashed, he dropped and broke his external hard drive, and his house was robbed and his home computer was stolen. In one day, he lost a whole year of work.
Wow.
It happened to him.
That's crazy.
Don't let it happen to you. Back up your files. Now, this next tip is one that has actively started fights in my comment sections before, and has made many, many people very mad at me in the past. It's a bit of a hard pill to swallow, but it needs to be said, so I'm gonna say it. Things every webcomic creator should do. Draw background. You need to draw background. I don't know how else to say it. If you want to make a comic, you need to learn how to draw background. I know a lot of people don't like to draw backgrounds. I don't like to draw backgrounds either, but you can't just avoid it because you don't like to draw them. You need to draw backgrounds. Please draw backgrounds. Backgrounds are a super important part of making comics. Depending on the story you're telling, your backgrounds can be just as important as your characters. A comic that has amazing character art can still be held back severely if the artist doesn't take the time to draw nice environments for their characters to exist in. However, that doesn't mean you have to draw super detailed backgrounds in every single panel, and I'd even argue that you shouldn't in most cases. I recommend at least one well-drawn background per comic page to keep your characters grounded in their environments. This is especially important to do when you're starting a new scene. Zoom out and show us the environment the characters are in. This type of panel is called an establishing shot because it helps establish the location that the characters will be in for the duration of the scene. However, once you've established the scene, you can breeze through on minimal details for the rest of the page. Here's a little example comic I made for my How to Web comic book that illustrates this. The first panel is pretty detailed and shows where all the characters are, but the rest of the panels have either really simple backgrounds or even none at all. Another thing to consider is that depending on the type of backgrounds you're drawing, you can and should reuse background art to save time. When I was illustrating this scene in my webcomic Castoff, read castoff-comic.com, by the way, cost link in the description. I drew the foresty backgrounds really well the first few times, and then copy-pasted a lot of the details over and over and over again, and just filled in any holes as needed. And you can do this too. I'll cover some more ways on how to make drawing backgrounds easier a little later in the video, but for now, let's move on to the next tip. Things every webcomic creator should do, number 5. Show feet. No, not like that, you weirdos. Piggybacking off the previous tip, in conjunction with drawing backgrounds, it's also important to show your characters in relation to those backgrounds. We all love drawing close-ups of our characters' faces, but it's important to zoom out every now and then and give your audience an idea of the character's surroundings. We want to show your environments as well as your characters. Where are they standing? Who or what is around them? How are they interacting with the space around them? And how can you tell the story with the backgrounds and the characters? The show feet joke means that every now and again you should zoom out enough that we see your character's whole body. I recommend trying to fit in a full body shot of your characters at least once every 2 to 3 pages or so. If you stay zoomed in too close for too long, your readers can lose track of where your characters are in the scene, and you run the risk of your shots being too similar and your pages feeling a little claustrophobic. Don't be afraid to zoom out and mix up your shots a little bit. Drawing backgrounds can build character, literally and figuratively. And speaking of making interesting shots and panels, things every webcomic artist should do, number 6, study screen design. So, some of you who have watched my previous videos might know that I went to art school. I have a BFA in animation with a minor in storyboarding. And when I was going through the storyboarding classes for my minor, I learned a lot about screen design, the art of directing your audience's attention for storytelling purposes. In films and TV, this is about
I
directing
know I
shot
probably can
composition,
improve
camera
my
angles,
drawings
and
a
the way
little
you cut
bit
between them to
more
get
if
your
I
story
use
and
like,
point
you know,
across
the
without
traditional
confusing your
basic
viewers.
shapes and
It's one of those
shit, you
things I'll
know.
nerd about for hours if given the opportunity, and I
You know,
actually have a lot of info
doing
about
the,
how to play the comics in my How to Webcomic
you
book.
know,
Believe it or
what's
not,
that,
screen design is also extremely
you
useful
pull
for
back
comic
a little
artists.
bit,
If
like
you think about it, comics and storyboards
like
for
doing
movies are
the
pretty similar mediums.
map out the
The main difference
eyes
being
and
that in film and
the
TV, your
ears, the
panels are
mouth,
all the same size, the size of your screen.
that type of
But in
stuff like
comics,
that.
your panel size changes depending on the layout of the page you're drawing.
You see, I
While the
can't,
two mediums aren't exactly the same, there's a lot
do
of
that for
principles that
some
we as
reason.
comic artists can learn from screen design and
You
apply
know
to
what
our
I'm
comics
saying?
to make
To me,
storytelling stronger.
a lot of
I
that gets in
could
my
make
way.
a whole entire other video on this topic, and if enough people ask me to, I might. But I'll keep it simple to just one tip for this video.
But
A common mistake I see in comics
a
is
lot of
artists
times,
breaking
like I said,
the
I know where
180
I've
degree
been
rule.
drawing all my
The
life,
180 degree
so
rule is something that a lot of people
not an
probably
expert at it,
realize
but I've been drawing all my
exists,
life.
but maybe don't know how to identify it until it's pointed out to them. The idea is that when you're setting up a scene, you should draw a line across it, and your camera should never cross that line. I'll put some graphics on the screen to explain.
Make that a little bit
Imagine
smaller
two
because he's
characters
in the
are facing each
background.
other and talking. Now imagine there's a line that connects them. This is your 180 degree line. When you're planning your shots, or in our case panels,
A little bit
your
smaller,
camera
yeah.
should stay on
Right
one
there.
side of this line. Using this rule means that character A will always be on the left side of the screen, and character B will always be on the right, no matter where the camera is in the scene. This helps the viewer understand what they're looking at more easily, even if the camera angles change between shots or panels. Breaking the 180 degree rule is when the camera passes over the 180 degree line. Suddenly, character A is on the right and character B is on the left.
Take your food from blah.
I do a lot of racing
It's not
sometimes,
mayo,
but it
it's
don't
Miracle Whip.
like I said, I'm in no rush to do this, so
Being a perfect mother is impossible. Any unexplained
a lot of
injury
times I'm
triggers
good at it.
investigation.
You know,
How did this happen?
good with having to
Parents
erase.
can do some terrible things.
But a lot of times I just keep going
Little Disasters,
over.
all episodes now streaming on Paramount
I'll just
Plus.
keep going.
Camping World is America's used RV Supercenter. We have over 22,000 quality pre-owned RVs in
And like I
stock,
said, I wasn't
featuring
planning
top
on
brands
doing
like Jayco, Forest River,
recording
Green
any of
Design,
this,
Keystone,
but
Thor Motor
if you
Coach,
can see it,
Springfleet,
that's
and
cool.
more.
If you
Browse
can't,
the full assortment at campingworld.com
sorry, I'll come
today.
back later and I'll come back later with some better footage. But there right now, I'm right-handed and my whole hand is numb right now. I barely can. That's why I dropped the pencil. Couldn't feel the pencil in my hand. But
At Viberg, we're experts in small business insurance. We think through every risk factor for your industry, crunch the numbers with our nerdy mathematical formulas, and recommend the best policy options for your business needs.
I don't get it.
oh,
Oh, right. That's why Viberg experts do the homework for you. Just call or go to Viberg.com to get a quote in minutes.
Now that I get.
Probably could have led with that.
Viberg.
you gotta think, like I said, they're on stage.
Change can confuse your
Oh.
audience and disorient them, causing them to question the layout of the scene, where characters are standing, which way they're facing, etc. The 180 degree rule also
It's
applies
like
to
the-
things
it's
like
like the,
movement. If your characters are running to the right in one
like
panel
the
but
camera.
running to the left in the next, your readers might get confused about which way they're meant to be
It's
running.
off stage.
It seems minor, but misuse of the 180 degree rule can cause a lot of clarity issues if you're not careful. And it's especially tricky because, from my experience at least, this isn't something taught in a lot of comics education. It's one of the first things you learn when studying storyboarding or film, but a lot of comic folks don't seem to know what it is. There's tons of stuff comic artists can learn from screen design, so I highly encourage you to do some further digging if this is something that interests you. It's a really fascinating aspect of visual storytelling, and it's a lot of fun to dig into.
And
Okay,
like I
now
said,
that I've
a lot
had
of
my nerdy
these
screen design moment, time for a swerve to a new topic. Things every webcomic creator should do. Number 7, work efficiently.
It's like
If you've
B-Man
seen
right here.
any
This
of my
B-Man
art-related shorts or TikToks or whatever, you know that I love me some
playing
art
the
shortcuts.
guitar,
Comics
the
are
bass guitar.
really time-consuming, and if you're doing a webcomic on top of school or a job, finding time to work on your passion project can be really tricky.
Like I said, I
Luckily,
got my
there's lots
light
of ways to help
source.
speed
My
up the
light source
tedious
is gonna
parts
be
of the
back up
process of making
here.
comics and save yourself time in the long run. Comics are already a huge time sink,
come
so
back
if you can shave a
down.
little bit of time off of your comic work, it'll make
Throw
your
some
life a lot
lights,
easier in the long run.
spotlights,
As you get
like
more
stage
comfortable with
lights.
comics and your medium of choice, you'll naturally get faster and find the process easier. But here are some tips that'll help you save even more time. Number 1, learn and use keyboard shortcuts. If you work digitally, keyboard shortcuts will save you hours of precious time. Pressing a button is a lot faster than digging through menus after all. Your art program of choice should have some setup already, but if you don't like the arrangement, you can always customize them and even make your own. Number 2 is learn how to use auto actions.
The railing
If there's
on
a
the
step of your drawing process that involves several steps
across
and you
the
do it
ceiling.
frequently, I recommend seeing if your program lets you program actions. Actions are a bit like computer scripts. Once you set them up, you can repeat that entire process with just a single button press. Here's an example of how I use them. Since I post cast-off pages on multiple platforms, all with different size requirements, I have an action setup that will export a page in every size I need and save them in their respective folders with one button press. It saves me about 10 minutes of tedious exporting every time I finish a page, and I love how efficient it makes my workflow. I also use actions to make the work-in-progress collages I post alongside every page on my Patreon. Patreon.com/castoff, by the way. I can just press one button and it formats them for me, saving me several minutes of tedious, repetitive work. Number 3, make some custom brushes. In digital art software, you can create brushes to do almost anything, and saves you a lot of time.
That's what I'm gonna think I'm gonna do next
Custom brushes
book.
are like stamps, and they can allow you to
I think I'm
draw
gonna try to go
repetitive shapes
digital
extremely quickly.
because, like I said, I'm a
Each
one
software
man.
has different features and limitations for their custom brush flow, so
One
I
man, I
highly
do
recommend
this.
researching and experimenting
Everything in
with yours.
my hand by myself.
Foliage brushes are fairly common, as well as brushes
So-
for adding things like effects and textures. I've made brushes to draw bubbles for underwater scenes, books in crowded library scenes, like little strands and like flags and jewelry and things like that. I recommend trying to make your own or browsing the web to see what you can find available for download. If used well, they can save you a ton of time. Number 4 is utilize 3D models. 3D models can be your best friends when it comes to getting reference for your comics. Whether it's moving a humanoid mannequin around to get the perfect pose reference, designing a room interior to keep details consistent between panels, or modeling an entire city block to quickly block in complicated perspective like I have definitely done in the past, I highly recommend using 3D models to your advantage. Clip Studio Paint, my comic making software of choice, has a collection of 3D assets you can use to reference in your art. Programs like SketchUp or Room Sketcher are good for building sets with existing assets. And some modeling programs like Blender are free if you want to make your own models for props, buildings, and more. In the current chapter of Cast Off, I've been making 3D models in Blender for all the different sets in the abandoned school to help me keep details consistent and draw some more complicated angles for more interesting panels. There are a lot of free guides online if you want to learn how to use these tools. Personally, I like to use the models as reference and either sketch over them or trace
So
directly
basically,
on top of them.
this probably be
But some
blacked all
software
out
like
right
Clip
here.
Studio Paint will allow you to directly convert 3D models into line art, drastically simplifying the process. It depends on what kind of software you have available and what type of style you're going for. Definitely play around, do some research, and see what you can do. Alright, moving along to things every webcomic creator should do. Number 8,
come around here.
build your own website. If you've spent any time in the webcomic space at all, you've almost certainly heard of one or more popular webcomic hosting platforms. Tapas, Comic Fury, and Webtoon are the 3 I know off the top of my head, but there's definitely others floating around on the internet, with more springing up all the time. And while I know these platforms and use them for my webcomic, something that's become a little worrisome in the past few years is how many new comic creators are relying solely on these platforms for publishing their comics. Most webcomics throughout the last few decades have typically been hosted on their own websites hosted by their creators. While platforms like Webtoon are great for attracting eyes to your work, I highly suggest having your comic's primary home be on a website of your own creation. Why? Control. Firstly, making your own comic website allows you full control over the look of the site and the content that's posted there. Most webcomic platforms aren't as customizable as the site you built yourself, and you'll have to bend to their rules regarding page size and other factors. Plus, webcomic platforms typically don't have good ways to manage side content. Things like character pages, concept art galleries, social media links, etc. Plus, if you're like me and make lots of bonus comics and little things like character playlists and whatever, you can make a page for them on your own site to show them off fairly easily. On a webcomic platform, however, you can typically only post comic pages and maybe make posts on your profile page. It's really limiting and can really stifle your creativity. Secondly, say you only post your comic on the hypothetical webcomic hosting platform. Cool comic.
Like I said, I'm drawing outside my bleed lines and stuff, so
thousands of readers that love your comic and everything is going
it'll be
great for you,
alright though.
but one
Like I said, it'll be able to cut everything off.
CoolComics.net shuts down. And suddenly, all the work you put into growing your audience there, it's gone. Your audience scatters to the wind and you're left with nothing, completely abandoned by the platform you trusted. This is not a hypothetical. This can, will, and has happened multiple times over. I've been doing webcomics for over a decade and I've seen my fair share of platforms that I used to use every single day just disappear overnight. Ask any webcomic veteran what happened to Smack Jeeves and watch their face fall. It's a whole thing. The problem with relying on external comic platforms is that you have no control over them. Sometimes a website might make changes you don't like or disappear entirely. Rest in peace, Smack Jeeves. This is why having your own comic site is good. If you're in charge, you don't have to worry about sudden changes out of your control. You can also do what I do. Have a main website for your comic, but also post pages on platforms like Webtoon and Tapas to get some additional eyes on your work. That way you can take advantage of the benefits a platform provides without being completely reliant on them. Now, the downside to making a custom site for your comic is that it will ultimately cost money. You'll have to pay for a domain name as well as a hosting service to store your files on. So if you're just getting started and are mostly doing comics as a fun little side hobby, maybe you decide you don't need to have your own website. But if you intend on taking your comics seriously, I always recommend having your own site to fall back on. Be in charge of your own site and don't leave your comic's fate in the hands of a platform you don't control. Next up, some important advice. Things every webcomic artist should do, number 9, take care of your body. You know what sucks? Carpal tunnel. Carpal tunnel sucks. Repetitive stress injuries also suck. And back pain. Oh man, back pain sucks. You know what sucks even more? Trying to make comics while dealing with the consequences of that pain. Being hunched over a drawing desk or an art tablet, drawing for hours and hours without taking a break, and other common activities for artists can all result in some negative effects on your corporeal meat suit. I know several people from my art school days who worked themselves too hard and drew for so long without stopping that they're now physically incapable of drawing. They were going to school to make comics and now they physically can't because they didn't take care of themselves and hurt themselves to the point where they can no longer draw. It sucks. And it's such a huge problem that in one of the comics classes I took in college, our professor spent a chunk of the first day of class showing us gory photos from carpal tunnel surgery to scare us into taking care of our hand. Carpal tunnel sucks. Injuring yourself in any way because of your art sucks. Don't let it happen to you. So, how do we avoid this? Remembering to take breaks and stretch is a good place to start. Every hour or so you should be getting up, walking around, and doing some wrist and arm stretches to keep your muscles limber. I'm not like a fitness buff or a physical therapist or anything, but these are some of the stretches that I like to do. Go ahead and pause if you'd like to read. Another tip I learned from art school that's been majorly helpful for not just my wrist health, but for the quality of my art in general, is learning how to draw from the shoulder, not from your wrist. It Sounds a bit odd at first, but it's actually pretty effective. A lot of times when drawing, you probably plant your wrist on your drawing surface and rely on the movement of your hand and wrist to do all the movement when you draw. These kinds of repetitive small movements can be a big contributing factor for wrist injuries like carpal tunnel. Instead of making your wrist and hands do all the work, try using your whole arm when drawing instead. Try to draw from the shoulder, focusing on using your full arm to draw each line. It's a little weird to get used to at first, but once you get used to it, it makes drawing a lot easier, keeps your art hand loose and relaxed, and with a little practice, it'll make it so that you're able to draw for longer periods without hurting yourself.
Sometimes.
This is how I've been doing it for years, and it's helped keep my wrist healthy so I can continue working on comics without pain. My last tip for this is to just listen to your body. If your wrist hurts, stop drawing and let it take a rest. If your back hurts, take some time to lay down and rest your spine. Forcing yourself to work past the point of pain will only make things worse, so please take care of yourself. And lastly, it's time for our final tip of the video. Things every webcomic artist should do, number 10, make the comic you want to make. I discussed this a bit in my last webcomics tip video, but I still think it's important. Webcomics are hard. They're a big commitment and making them takes a lot of work. If you're going to spend hundreds of hours on your comic, probably with little to no pay, you should be making something that you love. Rather than making choices based on what's popular or what you think will be the most marketable or accessible to an audience, I recommend writing the type of comic that you'd love to read. If you write something that you're passionate about, other people will be into it too. Be your comic's biggest fan. Don't be afraid of tropes. Be self-indulgent.
No, right.
Put all your favorite things in your comic. I mean, my comic is extremely self-indulgent. Castoff's got all my favorite tropes and character types in it, carefully curated for maximum creator enjoyment. It's easier to motivate yourself if you genuinely love what you're working on. Do you love world building? Design the most interesting setting you can think of and play around with how you'll show it off in the comic. Drawing backgrounds is a good place to start. I'm sorry. Draw backgrounds. Please draw backgrounds. What happens in this world? How do the characters and story fit into it? Do you love drawing your characters? Think of interesting situations to put them in and different ways to challenge them and see where it takes you. Draw them in the style you love drawing in. If you hate coloring, you don't have to make a color comic. There's tons of beautiful black and white comics out there. Most manga is done in black and white. I mean, come on. If you hate reading comics in a vertical scroll style, yours doesn't have to be that. Choose an art method that you love doing and a style you love to draw, but also try to stick to one that's simple enough that it doesn't wear you out. You should do your best to enjoy the process of making comics as well as the finished product. A note on this topic as well. A weird side effect of me starting to make my webcomic tips and tricks videos is that I've started getting a lot of comments that are phrased like they're asking for my permission to make their comic a certain way. I get a lot of comments like, is it okay to make a comic like this? Should I make a comic this way? Am I allowed to do this in my comic? And listen, I know I like to come on here and talk your ears off about making webcomics, but I am not the arbiter of all comics. I am just a simple person who is spouting my opinions based on my lived experience. If you want to make your comic a certain way, then just do it. Seriously, just do it. You don't have to ask for approval from me or anybody else. The joy of webcomics is that you make them for yourself. If you're doing this for fun, as a hobby, you aren't beholden to the whims of a publisher. You're the pilot of this ship. You're the owner of your destiny. If you have a vision for your comic, what's stopping you from making it a reality? Go out there and make the comic that you want to make. Follow your bliss and all that. Just go make something cool, alright? Alright. Cool. Alright, and that's gonna do it for this video. Once again, if you enjoyed this and want more advice about making webcomics, you can check out my other webcomic related videos in my art tutorials playlist, and also check out my book, How to Webcomic. Links for all that will be down in the description. The art in the background of this video is some Hollow Stars EN fan art I finished recently. They'll be up in my shop as stickers and keychains later this week, so go check that out if you're interested. Lastly, hey, if you like webcomics, maybe you'd like to check out the one that I make. I make a fantasy adventure webcomic called Cast Off that has a backlog of almost 700 pages available to read right now for free at castoff-comic.com. Link is down in the description. Alright, that's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Now get out there and go make some heckin' webcomics. Bye!
This is the type of gift that I only go to Etsy for.
Etsy is the best when it comes to customization.
We both love to have things that remind us of our kids.
The dope thing about Etsy is that you can customize those things.
I think my sister will love this gift for sure.
Gift like an all-star. Shop holiday gifts on Etsy.
I think I made that hand too big.
Whether it's from a sentence or a symbol,
go back and redo
open
it.
art brings your vision to life. But that's just the beginning. Once your character is created, you can use it in any story or setting with perfect consistency.
There we go.
With OpenArt's 3D pose editor, you can adjust your character's position and movements with ease. Want to take it further? Seamlessly place your character into any scene or background. The future of storytelling starts with you. OpenArt brings your ideas to life in ways you never imagined.
Our story continues on the Mount Crumpet Cliffs with an express delivery of Walmart's last-minute gifts.
Order up! Enjoy your macchiato!
Express delivery as fast as an hour.
Who knew?
Turn the light!
Oh,
Bingo!
Thank you.
Wait! Can I close the garage?
You know you are in a certified pre-owned Volvo when you have the luxury of spaciousness, comfortable seats, and a great sound system. You know you are in a certified pre-owned Volvo when you feel safe. Certified for the moments that matter. Certified by Volvo.
So, you want to make a webcomic, do you? If you clicked on this video, there's a pretty good chance you're either thinking of starting a webcomic in the future, or you've already started one and are looking for some additional advice. In which case, hi! I'm Star, and welcome to my channel. I've been making webcomics for over a decade, and I want to help you make your comic the best it can possibly be. Webcomics are incredible. There's so many talented creators out there who decide to make webcomics just for the love of creating and sharing their stories with the world, and most of them can be read entirely for free online. I mean, come on, how cool is that? However, a lot of folks starting on their webcomic journey can fall into various storytelling, artistic, and marketing pitfalls that can hinder their comics pretty significantly. Myself included. When I first started making webcomics, I made a ton of mistakes. Mistakes that I've learned from and now want to help you avoid. Which brings us to the topic of the video, where I'll be going into detail on some of the biggest things you should never do in your webcomic, as well as why you should never do those things and how to avoid them. But first, let's do our usual, hey Star, what you drawing? So, you guys might have seen some of my other videos with tips and tricks about making webcomics. But did you know I wrote an entire book on the topic? Because I did! How to Webcomic, the Ultimate Guide to Making Online Comics is a fun and educational book that teaches you everything I know about making webcomics in one convenient package. The first edition of the book came out in 2021, and I'm now currently raising money on Kickstarter to fund a print of the second edition, which has been revised and updated with over 70 pages of additional new content to teach you how to make your comic the best it can be. The Kickstarter campaign is live until May 5th, and if you support the project on Kickstarter, you'll get a discount on both the physical and digital editions of the book, and be among the first to get your hands on the new edition. The link to the Kickstarter campaign is down in the description. Oh, and the art in the background is me drawing the cover for the book. So, yeah. Anyway, let's get into the video. Here are 10 things you should never do in your webcomic. Things you should never do in your webcomic number 1. Don't start your comic with a long info dump exposition heavy prologue. We are starting this video with a controversial one. Oh boy. So this one is a big pet peeve of mine personally, but I know a lot of other folks agree. If your comic starts by dumping several pages of dense, lore-heavy world building right off the bat, it can be a major turnoff to your potential readers. The start of your story should have some kind of interesting hook that makes the readers want to keep reading. It should not be a barrier of entry people have to slog through to get to the actual story. 9 times out of 10, throwing a bunch of lore and
once upon a time, long ago, in the land far, far away.
It'll probably just bore them. If I open up a new webcomic and it spends the first, 10 pages going on and on about 1 million years ago, the gods ruled the world, and then they fought, and everything caught on fire, and then the world was made of fire, but then the fire was conquered by the water, and the fire stopped, and the gods learned how to get along, and also created people, and the magic of the realm, and the temples to the east and the west that housed the holy archaic artifacts that could destroy the world, and the people created robots, but the gods didn't like the robots, so another war broke out. I'm probably just gonna close that tab and never come back. If I'm reading a webcomic, I want to feel like I'm reading a story, not a dang history textbook. Now, if the lore is a big part of your story and you have to get it on the page right away so people understand it, there are more artful ways of doing it that don't involve just yeeting 10 pages of dense world history into your new readers' faces. Avatar: The Last Airbender does this pretty well. They introduce the concept of bending early on via dialogue between the 2 main characters. Instead of being exposited directly to the watcher, you understand it because you can pick it up from context clues and conversations between the characters. Other stories introduce world building by just having the characters exist in the world and talk about it naturally over the course of the story. And you, as the reader, get it because you can pick up the world building just by watching the story take place in that world. If the storytelling is done well enough, you might never need the world building exposited directly into your eyeballs because you'll be able to learn about the world naturally through context. Long story short, please don't make me read the entire world history of your setting in the first handful of pages. I see this really often from less experienced writers, and it honestly drives me up the wall. Introduce your story, introduce your characters, give me a reason to care, a hook to keep me interested, and work in the world building and lore of the world naturally over the course of the story. Moving on to things you should never do in your webcomic. Number 2, never draw at 72 DPI. So let's have a brief talk about image resolution, because this is something I didn't learn until embarrassingly late in the game, and some of you might be falling into this problem too. If you don't know, when working in digital art, you have the option to set your art's resolution. Imagine a 1" by 1" square.
That's panel 1 of page 12 I had to redo. Now I can ink this whole page.
The higher the resolution, the higher the DPI, or dots per inch, the more pixels are inside of that space. For most programs, by default, the resolution will be set at 72
now I can redo.
DPI.
I can just go ahead and ink this whole page now.
Standard for web images. If you're reading a comic online or looking at any other image,
Man, the Hood 41, Mr. Yogi.
the pictures you're seeing will
3
be
o'clock in the morning, I need to take my ass to bed.
However,
I'm out of here.
never
Peace.
want to draw